Hello, my name is Liana Hovakimian, and I'm a director of Investment Attraction USA West at Toronto Global. And I'm very excited today to have a conversation with William Chernicoff, who leads global research and innovation at Toyota Mobility Foundation. William, welcome to Toronto. I'm very excited to speak with you today.
Always enjoy my time here.
That's great. I've been wanting to do this for such a long time now. We've known each other for a few years now, and let's just dive into this. Tell us, what is Toyota Mobility Foundation and what is the goal and the mission of the organization?
So, practically speaking, Toyota Mobility Foundation is a Japanese nonprofit, but it is we carry the Toyota name and it was set up by Toyota, and really our mission is to unleash the human potential, help people achieve their full potential. And it's really through how do we help people do that through solving or removing mobility challenges, whether it's at large scale systems, how people individually move throughout cities, through private vehicles, emerging forms of ideas around public transit. And then on the other side, connecting it to the very personal, like the individual personal mobility. And that's been the focus of what we're doing here in Toronto, is more that focus on the personal mobility, or as we're calling it, the active mobility.
And that sense of purpose really comes through. And that kind of brings us back to how our paths cross. And I just want to provide a bit of context to our listeners here. You and I met a couple of years ago, and that all started with CrossFit, a Bulgarian startup in the digital technology space that is helping people with limb loss with their prosthetic feeding process. Alan Hutchison, co-founder and CEO of CrossFit, came to us in December 2022, and his mission and goal was to bring the technology to Toronto and Canada. And at the time, I recall that his story stayed with me. As you know, his son in 2009 was in a train accident and lost his both legs. And together they experienced firsthand just how cumbersome and outdated the process of prosthetic fitting was. And so in 2014, they founded CrossFit with that mission to bring that technology of easy feeding remotely to their patients. I started making connections for Alan here in Toronto, and it kind of, one conversation led to another. We learned about Toyota Mobility Foundation and how they were the recipient of the Toyota Startup Award in 2020. And then we learned about the foundation kind of quietly looking for the right location for a hub that would help scale technologies in this mobility space. And as the saying goes, all the roads lead to Rome. We were introduced by Greg Dere, the Federal Trade Commissioner at the time, who you went to school with.
Yeah.
We hosted your team in Toronto, and then a year or so later, we were standing together at the launch of the Mobility Unlimited hub right here in Toronto.
Yeah.
So can you tell us how that process was for you? How was the seed planted at Toyota? What's part of the hub idea?
The confluence of events they look like a confluence of event because there was a recognition of what we were trying to do, and so these seeming coincidences of different paths all leading, as you say, to Rome, or in this case to Toronto. There's some ways a recognition of, I like to say sometimes, right, luck is when preparation meets opportunity. Right. And so these weren't coincidences. The work we were doing with CrossFit, right, in the personal mobility space gave us some important insights and entry into what was happening. It certainly gave us some exposure to what we saw as the individual pieces of what would become this ecosystem that we've helped coalesce here in Toronto. You mentioned Greg. Maybe sometimes referred to as part of that MIT mafia. But connections matter, right? We needed to understand a little bit more, and here was somebody that I knew that understood Toronto, and trust matters, and he helped us open some doors and build those bridges to some of the early conversations that we were having. And when you start hearing from 3 or 4 different organizations independently that certain organizations like Toronto Global, like Mars Discovery District, are the people and organizations you want to work with, that gave us a lot of confidence. and why the hub as a whole. We Foundation works very broadly across this mobility space. We have projects where we are deploying and trying to de-risk solutions at the municipal level. We've done, I have a role leading research, and we certainly do a lot of investigation and engagement and kind of trying to understand what's coming down the pipeline. And it might be 10 plus years before those technologies ever really mature. And we've done challenges where we've helped startups, at that early stage move through and through the challenge process and maybe through the award process, get some financial resources to then create their prototypes. What happens after you develop a prototype? And how do you get to that end stage where you've started to scale? And there was this recognition that there was a gap, right? There was this gap in the innovation process that we felt was being underserved in this active mobility space, which has a lot of challenges. It takes a little bit of extra time, 2 to 3 years, to go through some of the technology in the validation space. You might be attacking markets that aren't necessarily viewed as highly profitable. So how do we overcome those challenges to create solutions? That's the goal. How do we bring value? How do we solve problems? And so as we started to think and study this, we realized that, we needed this idea that would then become the Mobility Unlimited Hub. And so once we had this idea for the hub, we wanted to then understand, how do we refine the idea? What did it really mean? What were the boundaries and the objectives that would we could coalesce? And so, we did our due diligence. We started studying this. What did it mean? And key to the hub is grounded in collaboration. Who would be that key collaborator, and how do we build those relationships that existed? And as you said, Toronto Global was a key part of that, and it also helped open the door to where we're sitting now at Mars Discovery District, and as a key collaborator to help anchor and bring this together.
Yeah, I mean, and my next question kind of ties to that. Once the idea was put in motion, there was a lot of groundwork. And let's talk a little bit about that process, because we at Toronto Global, we help international companies to expand here. And this is, again, just to provide context to our listeners, is not, our vanilla company that is expanding into Toronto and creating jobs. It's a different story. But when you came to Toronto with your team, we helped with those initial meetings. We provided information on the industry and ecosystem. I recall we took you to KITE, which is the flagship research facility of the Toronto Rehab Hospital. We explored potential partnerships with other industry partners. We then visited Toyota headquarters in Japan to foster the relationships. We met with the University of Toronto and the Dean of Engineering. We spoke with professors who are developing those assistive technologies. So all of that work, but ultimately the success came with your partnership with Mars, which is Toronto's, and I should say Canada's, flagship innovation hub. So can you tell us a little bit about that process and how that partnership with Mars came about?
Toyota Mobility Foundation, inherently we are a Japanese organization, so you can imagine there's a lot of due diligence that goes into as there should be, right? You don't want to just jump in without having the confidence that you're going to be successful. And we do like to challenge it. And you go through a very structured process of, are the right pieces there? Are we moving through? And we went through certain gates. And before we even created the hub, the first thing we did was go through, what we ended up calling this phase zero process of what was the design of this hub going to look like? And you were part of that process, and Mars was a critical part of that. You know, do we have all the right pieces? What are the right pieces? Do we have enough of those right pieces? How long should these cohorts last for? How do we want to operate? What are the gaps? Are we truly solving or addressing the right problem? And through that going through these different stages, we were able to kind of build up and bring all these pieces together, while at the same time in parallel, right, starting to generate interest. We talked to a lot of the people here. Does this resonate with you? Does this create value for you? Are you willing to participate? Through the trust that was being built and through the collaborations that were being built, we were able to overcome some of that chicken and the egg uncertainty. Yeah, we'll participate, but we need certain things, and here we are. we created this strong foundation that then made it a lot easier for everyone to come in. We had the confidence. We got the approval, from our leadership at headquarters to stand this up.
Mhm.
And then we took the plunge, right? And we didn't really have a model to look at. This is somewhat unique, certainly unique for us, but we didn't really see a model like what we've created anywhere else, because this is far more than an accelerator. This isn't a 3 or 6 month program that addresses certain parts. This is now a 2-year cohort that provides a breadth and depth of bespoke support to these startups in a way that hasn't really been done before. To be successful at that, it really does come down to people and organizations and how well we can work together.
Yeah, absolutely. And so last year, around this time, the first cohort of what we call today a Mobility Unlimited Hub was launched.
Yeah.
And you spoke a little bit about that, but what's the mission of the hub and how does it align with the goals of Toyota Mobility Foundation?
I don't know if I'm not going to give you the probably the written exactly what the mission of the hub is, but I view it as really creating the mission of the hub is to help these startups move from great solutions to achieve, go from that early stage to the growth stage, right? The startups we brought in are what we call pre-growth.
Mhm.
So that was the objective. How do we provide these comprehensive resources to help them overcome and move through with confidence and move through quicker and really increase the likelihood of success of moving through that pre-growth stage into that growth. And it required, it's the second time now I'll talk about kind of this chicken and egg idea of, well, okay, what do you need to grow? You need funding, but what do you need? How do you get funding? Well, you need to have a good go-to-market strategy. You have to have potential validation of the technology. You have to have all these resources in place. And how do you unlock that?
Mhm.
Well, one of the things we've done here, one of the value propositions of what we've created is to put all those pieces in place so that there weren't missing, it's a complete bridge. And when you have a complete bridge, you can move across it and you're removing those barriers and becomes positive reinforcing. You can get access to capital because you have confidence that the technology works or that you have the right resources to support it, or you have the right talent pipeline, or you've secured or have an easier path to market. It all just started to work together and very quickly start moving these solutions forward. And at the end of the day, that's what's important, right? It's from the foundation standpoint, it's how do these solutions help people move freely
And
and
safely.
have and safely and have that active independence that they deserve and we want them
Yes.
to have, right? The startups are they have their value and that they're important, their businesses. What we're trying to do is create solutions and not just create the solutions, but make them available, right? And that's that growth stage that we're trying to move the startups to.
Yeah. And so the startups joined around May last year, I believe. Can you
Yeah, I
tell
think
us
I
a
think
little?
we selected them in May, and I think the cohort officially started in July, but there were things that were happening in that in between there.
So can you tell us a little bit about the companies that are in the first cohort and what kind of technologies are they building?
The first cohort has 6 startups in it. Future cohorts, we're gonna be probably growing to 10, but this first one, we really wanted to make sure that we could provide the support, right? We didn't wanna risk stumbling, right? We'll build off of the success. The 6 startups in no particular order, I mean, the topics that they cover are across the active mobility
Mhm.
space, which encompasses for us that rehabilitative, that adaptive, and that assistive technology we have or or enables them to perform in ways that they couldn't before. We have a startup that is providing wireless charging. Why is that important? Well, imagine you are in a powered wheelchair. The ability to just simply roll over a pad that's on the ground, not having to worry about exactly any specific alignment. That means you don't need somebody to do that for you. You can charge your wheelchair when you want to. You can leave that charging when you want to. You've
Oh, wow.
literally cut the cord of the dependence on somebody else to make sure that that wheelchair has power. So it's an enabling technology, and it applies to much broader sets of mobility devices. We have, a startup that is effectively a lower body exoskeleton, but it's integrated into a rollator, which provides some really important aspects. And it's I'm not doing it justice in terms of the uniqueness of the design, but it helps people with particularly children with musculoskeletal limitations and then maybe congenital um, disabilities, uh, they'll be able to walk. And but it what it does is incrementally, and it's adjustable, allows them to get help and then take on more and more of that ability. So you're building muscle mass, you're building confidence, you're helping people walk. Now that's something that, a lot of people may take for granted, but what this really does is allows a progression to the people who are using this to more seamlessly participate with their community, with their friends, with their classmates, right? To not be separated, to have more of that agency. There's a startup that uh, inherently what they're doing is addressing or trying to prevent falls. But what it is it's a pretty ingenious uh, rollator with a chair that lifts, goes all the way from the ground all the way up to height. So in the unfortunate event that there's a fall, the person or their caregiver can easily get them back off the ground. But hopefully that never happens because when you can help people move from different heights, get from a bed to a chair, go to the restroom and use the singular device,
Mhm.
you can prevent the falls. Now, that's what it does, but what it also does is build confidence, right? And
Absolutely.
if you have that confidence, you continue participating in all the things that make life
In life.
meaningful, right? You're confident to go out, you're confident to move around your residence, you're confident to go down the street and engage, you're confident to get in and out of a car or use public transit, to go places. And if you stay active, right? You stay active. It's a lot easier to maintain that active lifestyle than it is to try to recover something that you've lost. There's a startup that has, almost taken a completely clean sheet approach of what if we could start from scratch? What would a wheelchair look like if we could build it today? Not take the old ideas, but given the state of advanced technologies, what can we build? And it does some pretty impressive things in terms of the terrain it can cover, how it puts people at different heights, overcomes, comfort, mobility. We have a startup that addresses its voice to sign language. And why is that important, right? Well, when you're out and about in public spaces, say particularly an airport or a transit hub, we're talking verbally, right? People are most comfortable when they can communicate in their native primary forms of communication. What we learned is that for the deaf community, it's not reading subtitles, it's sign language. So the ability to translate what you might be hearing from announcements in an airport into the way that people prefer to communicate. Again, confidence, comfort, that makes it easier to use these mobility infrastructures. The sixth startup is one that has developed an advanced sensors that can go on manual or powered wheelchairs. Again, what this does is this is all again about confidence. The sensors give that good feedback to the user of the wheelchair, potentially other mobility devices, to understand where they are so that they don't hit stuff. Now, that may not seem important, but the last thing people want to do, no one wants to call attention to themselves in the public space, right? You want to be able to move freely, right? And so it's a confidence builder, right? It helps people understand and prevent those things that might be viewed as negative from happening so that you're more comfortable going out. You can better use your mobility devices. And what's really fascinating about this wasn't necessarily the objective when we brought these companies in, but it's not going to surprise you that several of them have actually started collaborating. The powered devices are able to use this wireless charging, right? And the sensors are now useful for the wheelchair devices, and so there's this additive benefit that has come together about bringing these startups here in the hub.
Power of multiplication, I call it.
Yeah, yeah. We're not going to use the S word. We're not going to say synergy.
We kind of touched down on my next question, which is, I mean, it's so exciting to hear about all these innovations, but it also highlights why mobility innovation is so important today with in a community, an urban place like Toronto or in a rural, remote community. It's very important. And so, for to help companies that are tackling these big issues, support is really key. Let's talk a little bit about that. There is funding opportunities with the hub. There is mentorship and development opportunities. What is it that the companies can rely on by being part of?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, money is helpful. I mean, $100,000 in non-dilutive funding is certainly valuable.
Absolutely.
And here in Toronto is proven to be very valuable because it has helped unlock a lot of other funding. So there's this multiplier effect. It's 100,000 is useful, but if that leads to another several $100,000 of other funding that might come in,
Partnering up with all these provincial entities and
provincial entities or the universities who might, require, some cost share, that's
yeah,
been very valuable. No one's going to turn that down, right? But I think it's the other things that the hub brings together. There's a talent pipeline. There's the services that can be provided by a lot of the partners. There's the incredible and bespoke mentoring that happens. Every startup, like we talk about, the journeys that startups go on being somewhat similar, right? They tend to follow similar pathways, but the individual challenges are themselves unique. Some startups may need help with understanding go-to-market strategy. How do we help them? Pitch training, access to the market, everything that's needed for the large part is provided, including the repetition and the ability to get for the venture firms to get to know these startups over long periods of time that keep coming back to this term of confidence, but that's what it does when you start to see and you trust that the support infrastructure is there, right? And you see how these companies are growing and performing iteratively over months, if not now a year. Are you willing to come in and provide that additional support? And so it's not any one thing, it's this complete value chain that is being provided, and each startup is using it differently. Toyota Mobility Foundation, right? We carry the Toyota name. One of the things that Toyota is really good at is manufacturing, right? Not a surprise. And we have a center that actually provides training and education in the Toyota production system. And it goes beyond that. I mean, it's not just about manufacturing, it's about creating and building a culture of quality that comes out of this broader Toyota ecosystem. Well, we've been able to tap into that and help the startups. For anyone who's been in this startup, what I'm about to say, may not surprise them. But if for those who haven't done a startup or trying to learn about how to grow a startup, let me tell you, the transition from the invention side, the one-off, the prototyping into scale is a completely different skill set. And so how do you then also bring those resources to train people to understand how to create a supply chain, to build a culture of quality, to move from these one-off individual minimum viable product that more than just a prototype to the repetition of delivering product at volume is a different skill set. And that is an often underappreciated and sometimes unrecognized resource, the training necessary to develop that skill that we've also been able to bring into this hub.
and so to you know coming back to the support and the ecosystem that the Total Mobility Foundation, the Mobility Unlimited Hub are building, it's not no small task. So I imagine that there have been some bumps on the road at the beginning, and can you share with us some of the challenges that you've encountered or potentially foresee, and how you're prepared to tackle them?
be fair, we've been pretty fortunate. We didn't have any
I like to hear that.
major disruptions, and I think that in part, I mean, I think credit goes to some of our collaborators, Mars. I'm sure if I talked to them, they tell me all these things that they were scrambling with sometimes behind the scenes to make some things work. But, to be fair, yeah, we learned along the way, right? Like, are we putting the right resources? Are we allocating, the funding in the right way? We've had to learn along the way, but we've been fortunate that that learning hasn't really created a major stumbling block. They've just been opportunities for what we like to call Kaizen and continuously improve. Now, we're at the start of this, right? We're now approaching 1 year of our first top. Talk about this being a 2 year cohort, right? The end stage, right? Maybe to use the nature analogy of like, at some point, you got to push the kids out of the nest, so to speak, and they got to learn to fly. What exactly does that look like? We don't want a hard break. We're trying to grow an ecosystem, and the knowledge that these startups have generated is valuable for their fellow cohort members, but also the next cohort that we want to bring in. And how do we transition? To be fair, we're still working through that a little bit. I'm sure we'll get there, right? It's how do we adapt and evolve the support that the hub is providing. We want to grow. We want this to be that anchor, that ecosystem. So we want to draw a lot of talent from elsewhere.
Mhm.
It's not always easy, right? I mean, particularly, how do you bring in startups from overseas? What is the timeline and time frame for doing that? Those are I don't think those are unique challenges. It's why we engage with organizations like Toronto Global to help us overcome those
Figure it out.
challenges. Yeah, figure it out. Right? Nothing's perfect, but I think so far we've been fortunate, and, I think the cautious approach that we talked about from the beginning
Yes.
really allowed us to make sure that we had those resources in place, so as these challenges came up, right, it's if you put a fire out early on, it doesn't become a conflagration, right? You don't have to call the fire department in or rebuild a building, right? We brought a lot of that good design and resources in so that we caught a lot. The problem that you don't face is often one you may not recognize. But you do need to recognize that when you do things well, you might obviate or prevent those problems from happening in the first place. So it's, been interesting. But we're always vigilant.
Well, I'm glad that the road was not as bumpy as I thought. But now that you've been, or the hub has been here for about a year, it's time to look ahead. What's next?
We just announced our call for our second cohort.
Okay.
We're looking for the 10 startups, again, in that active mobility space, and we wanna stretch. Let's use a loose definition of what that means, right? We don't always know, obviously, what we don't know, and innovation by nature can be very disruptive, so we don't wanna be overly prescriptive. If what's next is hopefully finding that those next group of really potentially transformative startups that need the help and to be able to bring them in. And, over time, we want to I'll know we're successful here when I don't need to be here, right? That the idea of active mobility and in making investments, whether it's the human capital or the financial capital, is so attractive that it doesn't need the foundation to support this activity anymore.
So you are prepared to get the children out of the nest
Um,
at some point?
Yeah, and hand the nest over to the children, right? That will be success, right? Where that we have brought our know-how, our capacity, and created something that no longer needs us to be successful.
Absolutely. And so that growth of new cohorts coming in with potentially international companies joining the hub, it is going to bring in new partners and new voices. So how do you suggest that other stakeholders stay informed and then get involved in promoting the mission of the hub?
get involved? Well, getting involved, right? It implies the sense of actively being, engaged, right? So, for anyone to want to be involved, they should get something out of it, right? This should be something that is mutually beneficial to the people that are participating.
Mhm.
It has to advance their mission as well. So, if for the current ecosystem, it's finding ways where your knowledge, right, the know-how and capacity and resources that you have to, I think it's valuable to recognize how can you help the startups. It's a two-way conversation.
Yeah.
The startups are going to come and ask for help, but sometimes they may not see the opportunity to receive help. That's where the ecosystem comes in, right? The dialogue that says, "Oh, I see what you're trying to do. I can help you with that." Or have you thought about that? No, I didn't realize that that was an issue. Well, here's why we think it is, but here's how we can also provide a service or help you overcome that challenge.
Well, this is such a meaningful conversation that we're having today, William. And I just wanted to share what drew me to this work, and then maybe hear from you what's most important for you. Like I said, it started for us at Tron Global, started with Alan and CrossFit. And at the beginning of their journey, they were signed up this partnership with Sheridan College, where at the Sheridan Robotics Institute, there was a robot, an ABB robot, that was wearing the CrossFit's prosthetic socket and walking constantly, sitting, bending, and generating that data to advance research on the prosthetic sockets. And that loss and adversity that the family had to deal with was then turned into hope and determination and agility, and kind of did the multiplier effect when and provided benefit to so many other people. With your funding from Toyota Mobility Foundation, they were able to outfit amputees in Bulgaria at first, and then all around the world. And so seeing how that small engagement led to something so much larger with the arrival of Toyota Mobility Foundation, and then establishing the hub here in Toronto, that is incredibly inspiring for me. And I think that the real impact happens when vision meets the right ecosystem that you found here in Toronto.
Yeah.
And so, what how about you? What's most meaningful for you, and in this specific job that you're doing?
I think what's been most meaningful is, I mean, certainly, it's great to see people succeed, but the success that the startups are having, it's the people that they're
With
helping,
their help.
right? And what we haven't talked about yet, but I think is really important is what motivated these startups to even generate their innovation. Pretty much every single one
Had a story.
had a story that was related to an unmet need
Yeah.
that they or a family member or someone who was close to them had in the ability disability space, in the mobility space, and they weren't finding the solutions, right? You mentioned, CrossFit, right? They weren't happy with the solutions that were there for provisioning the sockets, and so they want to go do something about it. Same story for all of these startups, right? There is at the essence, this is about, helping people. I mean, that's part of the foundation's mission. But if I don't believe in or I don't derive value from that mission, I'm in the wrong place. So it's great to see the success that the startups are happening, but it's even greater to see that that success is providing transformative solutions
Yeah.
to so many people, and we want to help grow that. That that is the reward. That is the success that we're looking for, right? It's achieving that that human potential. It's giving that active independence. It's giving agency to people, and that just that positive reinforcement just. And it's not just about the people who are directly using the technology. People we often forget about everyone else in their lives, right? The caretakers, the family members, everyone is affected. And so when people had the ability to fully participate in society, it's just it's the impact is really important and really contributes to a healthy society.
And so these founders that have some story behind them, whether it's their family or friends or themselves, they are now every day dealing with things like product development, fundraising, hiring, company culture, payroll, procurement challenges. And with all that in mind that they have to deal with, what do you think it takes to be successful in this space? And maybe there are some fundamental principles that are applicable across the board, no matter what these companies are building.
Well, you just listed them all, right? I mean, that's the challenge is you have to be able to do all of those things, right? If you are missing any of those elements, right, you don't get the fundraising, your startup isn't going to be successful. If you can't refine your product to make it desirable, I mean, we're talking about innovation, right? But what sometimes isn't always appreciated, and I've taken this view for a while, is there's a fundamental difference between invention and innovation. Invention is the technology. The startups have invention, they have technology, they have solution. What makes it innovative is this market component, right? Can you bring a solution that captures the market? That's why we're trying to drive to this growth stage. Because when you've truly achieved innovation, it means you've had the impact in a lot of people are now benefiting from the invention. But to get there, it's everything you listed and probably, and more, right? It's the funding, the refinement of the technology, it's the regulatory approval, it's the ability to tell the story and get the information out there so that people want to and make the decision and have the resources to purchase or buy or use that solution. And it's complex. It's You stumble at any of those points, you may not get to the end.
William, thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you for sharing your insights. What you're doing at the Total Mobility Foundation is not just visionary, it's truly human. And first of all, I'm very happy that we played a very small role in supporting you with bringing this Mobility Unlimited hub to Toronto. And on behalf of Toronto Global and our listeners, I want to wish you all the best, to you, to the foundation, to the hub, and all the incredible innovators
Well,
that are here.
thank you, and let me say there are no small roles, right? Missing any piece of this bridge, it doesn't stand up. So everyone, including Toronto Global, has been, you know, an important piece of making this a reality, and I really truly hope that we leave a lasting and a meaningful and impactful legacy with what we've still at the early stages of this journey, but one that has is off to a strong start.
I can't wait to see what is next, William. Thank you.
Neither can I. Thank you.